So hello, everyone. John Desjarlais here. I'm the Executive Director of the Indigenous Resource Network, and you're listening to another episode of Indigenous Voices in Resource Development. So on this episode, we're joined by Crystal Smith, the former Chief Councillor of the Haisla Nation, a dear friend of mine and someone I'm so glad who agreed to spend a little bit of time with me, and to have a little talk, a little chitty chat. And on top of that, I have the extra special privilege of being on Haisla territory of your nation, and it's an absolute honor. So thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming to our beautiful rainy territory.
Absolutely. It's so fresh, crisp. It's amazing. I love it. Like the rain and everything like that. Just like I haven't seen enough of it this year. I welcomed it. So I'll dry off when I get back. That's not a big deal. Not a big deal. 16 years in leadership, and certainly helped, such transformative change, not just within your nation, but you're influencing other jurisdictions as well, too. And during that time, you've helped guide the Haisla Nation through a period of immense change, like I've mentioned. You've championed partnerships. You've driven, you've exemplified self-determination. You played a central role in the relationship between major projects with LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink, and of course, Cedar LNG, one of the very first majority-owned Indigenous projects in Canada. You also serve as chair of the First Nations LNG Alliance, and you advocate for responsible development in the resource sector. But I think what really resonated was throughout all those accomplishments, you always eloquently tied that work, its an importance to how your community is getting better, how outcomes are improving. And that just resonated. And so, there's leadership. And so now you continue this leadership on a national level. You are a member of Canada's Major Project Indigenous Advisory Council, and you bring that perspective to a lot of other places in which you serve, and including other boards and some of your entrepreneurial pursuits. So yeah, there is incredible things there. But one thing we absolutely love to start with is amazing accomplishments. But let's start with Crystal. Tell us a bit about your journey as a young person, as a young girl, and your journey moving forward, and we'll dive into, of course, the topics of the day. But tell us about Crystal Smith. Tell us about that member from Haisla Nation growing up here, your community.
Well, I've lived here my majority of my life, with exceptions of a few months here and there in Terrace, and moving to Surrey to be with my parents for a bit while my stepfather went to school. But majority of my life has been spent here in our beautiful territory. Just so close and tied close to family that I just did not want to leave, which definitely because of the lack of resources that were in community, lack of educational opportunity, mainly. I started with the Nation as a contractor many years ago, and was fortunate enough when the first female Chief Councillor, Dolores Pollard, was elected. I had some relationship prior working with her, that she saw a skill in myself to help her while she was getting organized, and kind of fell into the leadership, world, by supporting our elected leaders from 2009 to 2013 when I was elected. Also, growing up in our territory, being the first generation removed from residential school, I experienced a lot of the intergenerational trauma that most talk about: living in poverty, the sexual abuse, the violence in the home, alcoholism. Later in life, someone very close and dear to me, the father of my children, died by suicide when I was first elected in 2013. A lot, while I talk about a lot of this, it was a form of inspiration, in the sense that I did not want anybody else in my community to experience what I experienced firsthand and what my daughters have had to live with. So in a sense, working towards and seeing our people thrive and succeed is a massive goal. Makes me wake up with hope and determination every day.
Yeah, I hear you mention hope and determination, and I could see it. It comes out. And, in those experiences, I have I have my own experiences, descendant, residential school survivor, and driven in a much the same way that we ensure that our children live a better, more hopeful life. And I always, and then you think, am I succeeding? Am I doing better? And I always remind myself of when, I had the pleasure of taking my daughter to a work trip to Ottawa and then to Montreal. And we just kind of toured around, and she ate some good food and stuff like that. And then 5 or 6 months later, she said to me, she's like, I'm really craving those sweets we had in Montreal. Can we go back there? And I was like, well, probably not, but I'm glad you asked. Then that triggered something. And it's like, I would have never asked my parents, like, hey, can we go to Montreal and have some treats? I'm like, that's a whole city on the other side of the country. But she felt it was a possibility. And I was like, without entitlement, I was like, I think we're doing better. And so
those moments are
yeah.
absolutely amazing to
Mm-hmm.
to be a part of and to actually see where that, not even asking for a pair of basketball, pair of basketball shoes that were name brand. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was no way that I would be able to have done that when I was younger. And when I take a look at both my girls, and as they get older, you witness more and more where, as a young Indigenous woman, when I'd be asked what I wanted to do when I
Mm-hmm.
was grown up and not have a clue and only give the generic teacher or
Right.
social worker or a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
My girls don't have that. When you ask them what they want to be, they talk about being a orthopedic surgeon. They talk
Mm-hmm.
about doing so many different things that are outside of a realm of
Yeah.
what they've been exposed to, because they can dream bigger than you and I.
Yeah. And that's our goal as parents. And I think what's really important for people to understand is you're able to achieve that carrying all that intergenerational trauma that is, quite consistent with a lot of experiences that Indigenous people have, right? And still being hopeful and still being, wanting to move through that. It's inspiring. And that's absolutely cool. You talked a little bit about basketball. And so I know I got to know you a little bit personally, and then and I could see that's a strong passion of yours. And so tell us about that relationship. How was it? Was it an escape? How was that a part of your life?
Honestly, I think in our communities here in northern British Columbia, I think in British Columbia period, for Indigenous communities, basketball is a part of our culture. The All Native basketball tournament has been hosted in Prince Rupert for over 60 years. It is something that a lot of our youth and a lot of people my age are
Mm.
older generations.
Older. Yeah, we're not old, Chris. I know old people. We're not them.
Getting back into
Yes.
it though, I
Yeah.
definitely feel a lot older, but
Right.
it's essentially, I can say that basketball did definitely save a lot of lives in
Yeah.
terms of our focus, what you have to look forward to.
Yeah.
It was a massive reward, traveling and just being a part of a unit and holding pride in something that you could do that you were good at. It also taught me a lot of work ethic in terms of, continuously working for what you wanted and giving me that self-discipline throughout my life. I had many different coaches that, experience, from different generations of I'd say had it much harder than my generation did. Having that historical knowledge passed down in our change rooms, I look at them today and think, yeah, uh, I'm so grateful for them and their willingness to share and hand down the pride it was that you had to be Indigenous and that you had to be able to participate in something like the All
Mhm.
Native basketball tournament. I actually retired about 3 years ago, but since then, last year was the first time the All Native basketball tournament hosted a over 35 women's division. This year, I'm painfully getting back into
Yeah.
it. Painfully, and painfully, I mean
Yeah.
my knees aren't like they used to be. My shoulders aren't like they used to be, but it's something that is definitely, I'm finding a way of that mental health, taking care of myself by focusing in on something that I absolutely love to do and a
Mhm.
group of women that I love to be around.
Yeah, that's like it's important being kind of around, that peer group and in something organized that you all love doing, right? And so it's therapy. It's absolute therapy. And our bodies might not like it, but our minds sure do. And I can totally get that. We talked a little bit about experience with basketball, and then I think a lot of people hear about, the role with Haisla and projects and development and things like that. But you mentioned some things the other day we probably should hear a little bit more about. And you talked about, the support that you earned with your community. And so tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about, like, how did you get to consent? How did you get to consensus within your community. How did you bring them along? How were you a part of that?
I definitely appreciate the predecessors, Dolores Pollard, Ellis Ross, that spoke about community involvement, getting community support. It was something that our people had to be a part of and that they had to want in terms of the not only the project in itself and its physical format in our community, but more so the hope of wanting better in terms of that social aspect. The way we were able to get that support and get that consensus among our people was constant communication, very open and very transparent, talking about every impact that we were gonna see in the changes in our community, that we were gonna be able to witness and be a part of. But talking about the environmental impacts was one component, and getting through each of the hard conversations where our team were actively involved, and assuring our people that our teams were going to be a part of the process, a part of the planning, a part of the development, every stage of what LNG Canada was going to do, but to also group and talk about the social aspect of what and why we were supporting LNG Canada. And it was to improve the quality of the lives of our people. It was to revitalize our culture and language. It was so that our people would be able to come home and have an opportunity for employment, because a lot of our people do not reside within the local community. They reside elsewhere because of opportunity that they have in other communities. And when we're trying to revitalize our culture and our language, the more people we have at home, the stronger that momentum is going to be. So it was a massive collective of thinking about all the aspects of the project and all of the conversations that needed to be had. It was the first of its kind, the first time that our nation had taken the responsibility. I truly believe that it was a massive responsibility for us to take on, to be actively a part of a massive project like LNG Canada. It was all inclusive of every conversation, and it still continues today. Not something that you just stop.
It's not a process; it's a relationship.
It is a massive relationship, and it takes time, it takes attention, and those conversations are still being had. The LNG Canada was in the community a couple of days ago talking about the flaring, because our community has concern in regards to wanting more information about what's the noise, what's being burned off, and why does the flame get bigger at certain times. So all of those questions the answers are being provided not only by LNG Canada, but by our technical team, so that we're able to verify the information that's being relayed. And essentially, I think the most important component was the communication at the level that our people would understand. There was a lot of the technical conversations. We wouldn't go as technical and put it into terms that, that even us as leadership could understand. So I think that was an important component. Certain times throughout the time span that we were participating in the new economy, that I like to refer to it as, we took it upon ourselves to have community referendums. And for a long time, we focused on people that were local to community, but we felt that was important to be inclusive of all of our people, regardless of where they reside, because they are from home. So we would be inclusive of community votes, whether they supported, and again, showing all aspects of the project, including the impact benefit agreement, and showing exactly what was at stake, both financially, environmentally, and then having them decide and give leadership that go ahead to pursue opportunities such as LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink, and then later Cedar.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's so many things there. It's important that it felt that, again, it was mentioned this morning to me, clarity. And I think what they were getting at was, and what is important in this process is that the information is presented in a way, and it's important, and it's not transactional. Here's information. How can we get it to you so that it makes sense to you, so that you're truly informed, right? And so when we talk about FPIC, the informed is like, we're not just, here's information, we gave it to you. That's, and whatever you can make of it, you can make of it. It sounds like the priority is, and it's only only satisfied that aspect is when the community got the information, they understand, and it felt confident that they were making a decision and supporting. I think that's an important aspect when we talk about consent and consensus. But one question, and there's a couple more before that. One question was, did you feel that there was less hesitancy, like an engaging community and then going through this process? Was there more, I don't know if I'd go say as far as excitement. In my experience, organizations are so hesitant, let's get this over with, whatever we got to do. But did you feel there was more of an interest to, like, we got to do this well and right? If we're not doing it, that's just not how we're going to engage in engagement and consultation?
There was so much enthusiasm both on our part as the leadership and also LNG Canada,
Yeah.
to do it in the right manner, that our people receive the information in a timely manner. But I think what was more also important to that component was the follow-up that happened
Mhm.
after these conversations had occurred. And for example, say we have one massive information session that was inclusive of different components of the project. But there was one key area that our people would focus in on because of, certain cultural components that were important to us in the timing of the year. Dredging.
Mm.
The dredging that occurred quite a few years ago
Mm.
it was a massive concern because we still have people that still go and provide for their people on the ocean. So the dredging was a concern.
Mhm.
So there were many follow-up sessions where, the information went more in depth. And, I give credit to LNG Canada
Mhm.
that willingness and to be in front of community, answering questions. And, the transparency of even being able to say, well, we don't know until it happens. And where I mean the follow-up happening when the dredging occurred and there was a
Mhm.
plume,
Mhm.
LNG Canada was right in the community as soon as a concern from not only our membership, but
Mhm.
community here in Kitimat were talking about it. They were in front of our community, answering questions, getting the data, and being open and transparent. And I think that gave community a lot of reassurance that the proponent was going to be following up and was there to listen, and not only listen, but to be able to react
Mhm.
and give the information in a timely manner was, I think, something that our community has never seen before. It provided that honesty, and it made the relationship, not just with leadership, but community, more valuable and stronger
Mhm.
because of it.
Absolutely. Like, that is a perfect example. A lot of the things that some of the things that I've seen that are really positive is that consultation engagement is not like, the more we try to treat it as a process, get over it, the more issues, the more risk. If we treat it as a relationship and we want to satisfy the duty, we want to move on, de-risk investment. No, it's a process. And really our commitment is about the relationship, then you can address those issues. And in that example of that, where an orga proponent says, we're going to have an impact, and we're going to have an event, and we're not sure of the totality of the impact, but we're right there with you. We're being open and honest. We'll manage it with you. And that exemplifies, like, and I know people are saying that consultation, we can never know truly the 100% the impacts to rights and everything like that. But as long as we're open, accountable, honest, and transparent, we can manage those together, manage the relative size of the risk and things like that. And so a great example of how to build trust, how to deal with these issues together, and how to, again, sustain consent, right? And so, because we always hear, how do we sustain it? Well, if you treat that process procedural, you're done. How do you ensure you're sustaining it? No, it's ongoing, and it's a relationship. So yeah, that's incredible. There was a couple more through that were, I think, that were really inspiring, because some of the challenges in Canada today are, how do we achieve consent and then consensus? Maybe you have experience in this, and this was kind of asked a few times the other day, but never really answered. What do you think, that could look like in terms of, you have nations with overlapping jurisdiction? What could that look like in terms of achieving consensus? You might not have a nation consent, but you might have a majority others. What do you think that could look like?
And I think, for one, the territorial boundaries is a massive issue between
Hmm.
Indigenous communities that creates friction. It's a lot of tension, especially when there's an opportunity like a
Hmm.
pipeline. When you talk about, this is my boundary, therefore I'm the
Mhm.
one that is going to benefit from the work with past
Mhm.
this line. I think Indigenous communities, we've heard it for so
Mhm.
many years.
Mhm.
We're
Yes.
stronger together, and really, what does that look like, and what does
Mhm.
that mean? And
Yeah.
I honestly think that through my experience being with the nation, I came on at a time where that was being said.
Yeah.
This is our territory. Nobody else is going to benefit but
Mhm.
Haisla. And having the conversations around, you know, our communities are so connected in a way that, you when you're talking about a territorial boundary, you don't take into consideration, well, I've
Mhm.
got a grandmother or I've got a
Right?
grandson that's from
Yeah.
these
I've heard so
communities.
many people say I'm from Gitgat, but I have a niece that's half Haisla and half like, yeah. And then people ask me, it's like, oh, are you this, you that? It's like, every single one of my nieces and nephews, I'm Métis. Every single one of them are First Nation, and different communities. It's like identity and how we support and kinship is more complex than just lines and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. And it existed prior to
It
contact.
did. Yeah.
How did we resolve those issues prior to contact?
Yeah.
It was through culture, it was through ceremony, it was
Mm-hmm.
through conversations of our chiefs getting together
Mm-hmm.
and talking about how we were going to live cohesively, but
Mm-hmm.
also benefit one another. So when you think about the context of today's economy, I think rooting back to how we once lived prior to
Mm-hmm.
contact can benefit in terms of how we have these
Mm-hmm.
conversations and how communities interact. At the end of my term, a community that resides in Terrace went through a treaty process,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about overlap issues and how do you resolve
Mm-hmm.
them where you have impact in community. And I was talking about, this is a colonial process that
Mm-hmm.
we're talking in right now. You're talking to different levels of government in order to resolve an issue that exists between our
Mm-hmm.
neighboring communities that we've had relationships well before contact. How did our ancestors resolve this issue? I know stories, historical documents that state, where a river
Mm-hmm.
crossing had happened, that's where the boundary was, and you had to get specific permission in order
Mm-hmm.
to go into somebody else's trap line.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we take those conversations back into
Mm-hmm.
today's context, resolve the issues between our communities in terms of how this is going to look, how this co-management is going
Mm-hmm.
to look. But you can relate it to today's economy
Mm-hmm.
component. You think about equal shared opportunity. There are ways that we can work together, but it has to be that willingness of our Indigenous communities to
Mm-hmm.
actually say and walk the talk
Yeah.
of we're stronger together.
Yeah.
And we're talking about today's the past
Mm-hmm.
announcements that have happened over the last few months between
Mm-hmm.
Alberta and
Mm-hmm.
BC around this oil pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking in Banff on a panel, and good friends with Stephen Buffalo,
Mm-hmm.
very good friends with Dale Swampy. And I woke up and to take a look at my LinkedIn, and I see this news report about Gateway and talking about the opportunity that was lost in regards to that project when it was canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd stated then on that panel, we're friends. Let's go have a conversation about exactly what had happened and what
Mm-hmm.
occurred from our perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
let us learn from you about what opportunity was lost. That has
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah.
The friction and the approach has to
Mm-hmm.
occur not only with proponents and government, but it has to occur
Yeah.
between
Nation
our
to nation.
communities.
Yeah.
So let's
Mm-hmm.
start moving towards being stronger together.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I spoke quite a bit about that, having that abundance. Let's grow the pie. It's not about, it's not about cutting and slicing up and you getting less and zero sum, but let's grow our economy. Let's grow our territorial or regional economies, and let's do it together, stronger together.
And be
Yeah,
supportive of one another.
I
There
know.
are going to be hard conversations, and
Yeah,
they have to be had. They
yeah,
have to come to a resolution as to
mm-hmm.
how we work with
Yeah,
one another,
yeah.
because not every project is going to be situated in just one territory.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that conversation is more important. And we have to stop looking at other people to resolve that issue for us. It has to be us that you want to be respected. You want your rights and title to be front and center. Then we have to do that work in order to get to a place where, we're not being talked down to. We're not.
Yeah.
It's done with us as a collective because
Yeah.
we know where we want to go and we
Yeah.
know where we want to be.
Absolutely. Like working together and stronger together. Maybe this is a good pivot. So, and hearing Alice talk about the other day, talking to our good friend Chris, and the arrows in the back. And so you've advanced progressive relationships, achieve the social, achieve, of course, the economic. Tell us a little bit about the dark side of that journey, right? And so, I mean, how do you deal with, I'm sure you've experienced some of that lateral violence. How do you deal with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At one point, and I honestly thought the longer I stayed in leadership with my community, the worse it was getting. It
Mhm.
felt like more of the gloves were coming off, but I experienced firsthand the lateral violence from other Indigenous communities before I experienced it worse with my community. The blockades around Coastal GasLink were probably one of the most trying times of my career being as the chief counselor. I had great support systems in terms of the circle that I was able
Yeah.
to develop and lean on in terms of times like that. But I told Susanna Pierce this, we had an engagement the day after, and the night before I was playing with the settings on my phone,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when dark mode first came. And I didn't realize that when Messenger separated from Facebook,
Yeah.
that it created a spam folder that
Yeah.
when people that you're not
Yeah.
connected with go to. There were
Mhm.
so many messages in that folder
Yeah.
from different, different people from different communities talking,
Mhm.
telling me how colonized I was and what an apple, so
Mhm.
red on the outside, white
Yeah.
on the inside, and
Oh, yeah.
that I
I
was
know the term. Yeah.
destroying my people's future and
Mhm.
destroying our culture
Mhm.
and just like the whole nine yards.
Yeah.
And seeing posts of shares where I would do op-eds or I would do press releases, those photos being shared saying that,
Mhm.
accusing me of
Mhm.
even going as far as sleeping with CEOs of why I supported this project. And then our community started, it kind of started going into our community where I just wasn't the focus anymore. Our leadership, it was actually our people that became targets of being called sellouts as they were shopping in Walmart or,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
All Native basketball tournament was probably one of the most eye-opening times for me,
Mhm.
where my sisters wouldn't allow me to walk down the hallway by myself because they were fearful of the retaliation that
Yeah.
I was going to get as
Yeah.
the chief counselor. And although it was one of probably the most difficult times
Yeah.
in terms of being in a setting that I enjoyed being a
Yeah.
part of, it was also a time where I saw our people come together
Mhm.
and be so supportive, being supportive of me and ensuring that I was okay, but also seeing them come to bat for an industry that they knew
Mhm.
was going to provide them a changed life in that moment. And there was many different other key moments along my time as being chief where I knew what we were doing was worth it.
Yeah.
But essentially seeing our people come together and for them to understand, I take for granted that I lived that life for 12 years
Yeah.
as a part of my leadership.
Yeah.
I take for granted the knowledge that I have over the years of why things happened the way they happened. But seeing our people understand what was going to happen to our community in the good impacts, the investment into our people, the investment into our culture and into our language. They saw that and they believed in it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've got two daughters. I've got two grandsons that I absolutely, would
Mhm.
walk to the ends of the earth for. And ultimately it was
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
that helped me. My grandson pretty much moves in with me when I'm at home.
Mhm.
He spends all of his time with me,
Yeah.
knowing that the work that we are doing today is going to benefit him and his future
Yeah. Yeah.
was absolutely worth every component of the lateral violence that I experienced.
It just, I remember something popped into my head, and then like true leadership, plants a tree knowing that they may never eat from the fruits of that tree, but it's for the generations forward. And you talked about that and that drove that forward. And that's a great example. You mentioned some other moments that you thought, okay, that's a lot of tough work. So When I was chatting this morning, we talked about leaders, Indigenous leaders and First Nation leaders right across Canada have some of the toughest jobs because you have to, and you've talked about this, you have to have vision and hope. You have to work towards it. No, it's a long game, but you have to deal with the issues of the day. And I didn't talk about this. You're also dealing with that lateral violence, right? And so incredibly challenging. So tell us about, aside from your immediate family, tell us about those other little nuggets that, like, yes, this is worth it. Because that's strength and resilience that is absolutely inspiring. So what are those things that you're like, yeah, those 6 months were hell, but this 3 hours or one day or one week is absolutely the reason I was doing it.
It was, I was really fortunate for the times that I did have those other moments, during the times, the low of the lows, like things would just, I don't know if the moon or something
Yeah.
would have an impact,
Mm.
but it just seemed like a lot of things would go wrong at the same time. And it was just a matter of, constantly focusing in on, if we get to this point, we'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I've since moved in my community, but when I was living at my daughter's house, there was another crystal smith who works for LNG Canada.
Yeah.
She lived across the street from me.
Yeah.
So having the same name, our mail would be delivered to each other's. So there's always a point in time where we always have to connect because of having the same name. And one day she messaged me on Facebook and said, I got something of yours was delivered to me. Are you home? So we met in my driveway, and it was during one of those moments where it was just struggling to find that light and that ignition to keep going. And she had told me she'd been living with her mom, and in the house across the street there was her husband, her daughter, her mom, and her brother all living in the house across the street. And she had just gotten her job with LNG Canada. She had worked for Fleur prior, so she'd been on the project for many years. And she obtained her first mortgage, and they bought a house here in Kitimat. She had just told me, just out of the blue that day, I got approved for, we're buying a house. And, it was one of those moments where she was saying, thank you for all of your work and all of your dedication to where we're at today. Like, this opportunity has provided my family and I with the opportunity to buy our own home and to live in community and to raise our family here. She's still with LNG Canada, and still living here in Kitimat. And it's those moments where there's an opportunity that has been provided from the work that you go in and that you do, that is being recognized for, this is a result of the work that you and your team are doing. So thank you. So those moments were absolutely very timely, and that's just one example of the time. Those are meaningful.
Yeah. And what a lot of people don't maybe they do, I don't know, but I do know, like, in the challenging work that you do and had to have done, and through the adversity, it, having a special moment like that, absolutely, like, there's so much energy and so much positivity that comes from it. It gives you that resilience to deal with another heavy onslaught and wave. And I've experienced that through incredible challenges, and just having that one person come up to you and said, you've changed my perspective. I'm now doing this. My life is different because of some of the work that you've done, right? And so I can relate, not on your scale. I've never been chief councillor, chief, or president, or anything of any government, and I don't know if I have the resilience that you do or the patience, but I can imagine how powerful a moment like that would be, right? Yeah. And so I'm sure you've had to make a lot of tough decisions. How do you navigate some of those challenging decisions? What's your thought process around some of that?
One is, made it a point to surround myself with really, really smart people.
What are you doing here then? What are you doing on my podcast?
That's why we're friends.
That's why we're friends. A couple of smart people. Yeah, just having fun. Smart people.
We have a great team that had vision alignment in terms of where we wanted to go. Having a team that you can lean on and go to during tough times, and having that ability to talk through some of the scenarios of the decisions that you had to make. The councils that I was fortunate enough to serve with, we all had a vision. We all were in alignment with the canoe in the same way. And that was absolutely important for us to have that cohesiveness and that teamwork, where the decisions that we were making at the time were supported by one another, and we all had the intention of the same outcome that we wanted to see the result of. So a lot of the hard decisions, we stuck to our values, we stuck to our vision, and pushed through, having a willingness to be uncomfortable in different settings in order to get to that comfortable component that of where you vision yourself. But having a great team, having a great council, I was very fortunate to have both of those, and the messaging behind it, and staying consistent in that messaging and not deterring away from it was absolutely important.
No, that's incredible. Yeah, having I think one of the first things, I mean, surrounding yourself with people who are much more capable in other areas than you. I do all the time. Don't tell my team, but they are absolutely smarter than me in so many other areas. And then, of course, I had the opportunity. I gave a guest lecture the other week, and one of the questions the students ask is like, again, how do you make decisions and everything like that? And you affirm that I've said the right thing, which was, invest in understanding what's important to you, your values, and know you'll never make a wrong decision or a decision that you'll regret if you understand your values, you stick to your values and let them guide you. And so, yeah, I guess I said the right thing. So you affirmed it. Whew, glad. But yeah, so, that's incredibly, powerful. Something popped up. I really wanted to kind of revisit this because this is a really important conversation, I think, and ties in, and maybe it'll weave into some of your future endeavors. But, we talk about, I think as Indigenous people, we talk about duty to consult, we talk about impacts and everything like that, but we focus on adverse impacts to rights, and we try to accommodate, but we ultimately try to mitigate and we try to remove. But do we really truly understand, and are we starting to get a better appreciation for the positive, the benefits, the economic impact, the socioeconomic impact? And I think you mentioned describing those, like the socio and what that means in terms of social and economic impact job. But do we do a good enough job of informing communities? Yeah, these are the adverse, but these are the possible long term. This is if we partner. This is what this relationship could look like. Do we do a good job of that? Sounds like you've done a much better job than many. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's always areas of needed improvement. I mean, did we do a perfect job in our community? And but it's ongoing. It's that consistency. There are so many other stories that need to be told in terms of how that balance. It's a balance of being able to see the long-term impacts versus the long-term social good impacts. It needs to be improved upon, and I'm hoping that through all of that adversity that I'd spoken about, that I'd gone through personally, that our community went through in 2019 with Coastal GasLink, that now that the projects are in operation and communities are starting to see the revenues coming back to their communities, that they're going to start seeing those impacts and those positive social impacts where, communities along the pipeline and here in our own community and the shipping communities are able to see what these revenues can do for your community when your leadership is making a decision in terms of your community's priorities, and that they're able to tell that story. The communities that you do hear from talk about the improved housing opportunities that they're able to implement because the governments aren't giving out any. They're reducing budgets. So our communities have to have the ability to find own source revenue to be able to meet the needs of our people. And and when Coastal GasLink started flowing the molecules of gas here to Kitimat, those revenue switches turned on to the pipeline communities. So I'm hoping that there'd be more willingness to share and able to move past finding that balance, and that the communities themselves, the membership, are able to see what their leadership is capable of when you do participate in the economy.
Absolutely. And like every investment, everything comes with risk and reward. We need to do our homework to understand what that risk is, how we manage that, but also what the reward is, and weigh those and dealing with our issues of the day, right?
Yes.
So I'm really hopeful as we advance new legislation, new interest on, on sovereignty and security in Canada. There's now Bill C5 and there's bills across Canada. And when they announced the Indigenous Advisory Council, I was ecstatic. Knowing so many people, knowing you, and I have to say this, for the first, I recognized, and this is an issue across Canada, that this council was not there to represent my rights. This council was there to advise, because the rights holders are going to be engaged through consultation, that process. I am really happy that there was a council elected with depth in engagement, depth in business, depth in all these leading edge practices that would help to ensure that the right things are being done. What can you tell us about your new role within the Major Projects Indigenous Advisory Council and what we can expect going forward?
I mean, it's an opportunity, the first of its kind. I know that there's definitely a lot of pressure in terms of getting it right, and that recognition that we're simply advising the Major Projects Office in terms of how to do and engage Indigenous communities better through policy implementation, through decision making at their level. But that recognition of the rights holders, that there is nothing replacing that, and the assurance that we're not there as a consultation process. We're simply there to improve that process in terms of meeting the needs of Indigenous communities across Canada. There's a lot of work. There is definitely a lot of work. From a federal level to provincial level, there are areas, through our experience, through our team going through every process to get 2 major projects done. There's a lot of insight in areas of different overlap that I'm hoping that I'm able to share. The connection that I have with communities here, with Nishka in particular, going through their process in itself, being able to connect with other communities to hear feedback as to maybe there's similar areas that we can focus in on in terms of getting these projects done. But it's essentially, to support, to ensure that what we've experienced here in our community is something that's in common practice at both the federal level, but also and continuing to do that work at a proponent level to share that how we were able to get these projects to be successful. We had our first meeting, definitely an amazing group of Indigenous leaders. But I'm definitely looking, I think a little bit selfishly, I'm looking forward to sitting at the table and to learn from their experiences as well, to kind of grow my perspective and help me be a better Indigenous advisor at that committee.
Of course you'd say that with all your humility. And I'm sure and if they're not, they better be, but I'm sure they're saying the same thing about sitting at that table with you. We've taken up, I think, enough of your time. Absolutely appreciate you joining us. Thank you for your insights. I can hear you say the same thing over and over. It's just as inspiring. You tell it with such passion and honesty and humility. It's an incredible story. I hope people enjoyed today's episode of Indigenous Voices and Resource Development. Please subscribe, rate, review, like, share, all those good things. And so thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes, I had a blast.
Hi, my name is Crystal Smith. I am the former Chief Councillor of the Haisla Nation and a proud member of the Indigenous Advisory Council for the Major Projects Office, and I am a proud member of the Indigenous Resource Network.